So getting to our speakers, I would like to introduce Cedric Fonville. Cedric is the Chief of Staff for Interform. Cedric was born and raised in Star City, Arkansas. After high school, he went on to serve 6 years in the Navy as an avionics technician. He finished his service and returned back to Arkansas to complete his bachelor's degree in finance at the University of Arkansas in 2016. He later launched his small business, Nice LLC, and now operates that while also serving as chief of staff at Interform, which is an arts and fashion-based nonprofit here in Springdale, Arkansas. In addition to Cedric, today we'll also be joined by Erica Harmon. Erica is the editor and copywriter of Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and The Momentary. As a member of the communications team, Erica is responsible for writing compelling marketing copy and messaging, as well as editorial content creation for both locations. She edits all of the words you see on the museum walls, runs the Crystal Bridges and The Momentary's blogs, and is the editor of the annual membership magazine, See. Prior to working at Crystal Bridges, Erica worked in book marketing for a small book publishing company based in Dallas. Before that, she worked for Edelman Public Relations in New York City and in Dallas, where she honed her messaging development skills. Erica is a graduate of the J. William Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Arkansas, and she lives in Fayetteville with her partner Ben and her adopted cat Bird. Okay. I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to turn it over to Erica.
Thank you so much, Brittany. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning and to see everybody here. Thank you so much for joining Cedric and I. We're really excited to talk about this topic and hopefully provide some helpful anecdotes and solutions. And so I guess this is the first Communications Week event, which is also super exciting. As we dive into it, I can tell you just a little bit more about Crystal Bridges and the Momentary if you're not familiar. So Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art is in Bentonville, Arkansas. We just recently celebrated 10 years of the museum being open. This November will be our 11th, and I have been working at the museum for a little over 4 years, and just within that time, it's been crazy to see the amount of growth and change that has happened. So I think the work that I do is very pertinent to our topic this morning about how do we really communicate those changes, especially in a large organization to a small organization. It takes a certain amount of things that you have to think through. But anyway, so Crystal Bridges is first and foremost an art museum. It is an American art museum. We operate with putting forth 3 different pillars that we offer. So we have that art component. We also focus on architecture as well as nature. We have 5 miles of walking and biking trails around the museum with over 30 sculptures out there. And this is all punctuated by a rotating schedule of exhibitions every year. We put on anywhere between 600 to 800 public programs throughout the year, both on our campus as well as out in the community. And then we also offer a year-round school visit program where we have anywhere between 30 to 50,000 school children who visit the museum for field trips every year. Our staff total, when you count all protection services and facilities and everybody else who works at the museum, is a little over 300 folks. I sit on the communications team, which can be anywhere from about 15 to 20 people. And so that includes, our team of graphic designers, marketing staff, PR. I, like Brittany said, I focus on editorial and copywriting. So that's kind of my area. And then we also have a digital team as well. And they produce everything that you see at the museum. So when you walk in, all of the designs, the signage, pretty much everything that is not art comes out of our department. So it's definitely a lot. And then, of course, we also have the Momentary, which we opened on February 22nd, 2020, which I will get to that date in a minute. But the Momentary, if you've not been there engaged with it yet, it is our satellite contemporary art space in downtown Bentonville. So definitely a completely different vibe than Crystal Bridges. It is not a museum, therefore it does not have a collection. So it's more of a visual and performing art space. So you can come in and see rotating exhibitions throughout the year, but they also put more of an emphasis on performing arts, performance, dance, theater. And then we're also creating a lot of live music in that space as well. So that's just a little bit more about the particular venues that I work for, and I will turn it over to Cedric to talk a little bit about Interform.
Thank you, Erica. And cool, I guess, connection a few months ago, Interform, which many people know us for our Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week. We were just at the Momentary in March for our Spring Fashion Week. And we'll be back at Crystal Bridges in November for a one-day fashion event. So some promo there for both organizations. But as Erica said, and as Brittany said in the introduction, we're happy to be here today to hopefully provide some insight, answer some questions, and see how we can be useful in the next hour and 15 minutes. My name is Cedric Fonville. I'm with Interform. We are located in Springdale, in downtown Springdale to be specific. And we have 3 different offices within walking distance of each other. So if you ever find yourself on Emma and want a tour, just let us know. We'd be happy to give you a tour of the spaces and kind of see some of the things that we're doing here. We're an arts and fashion nonprofit, and we rebranded from Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week and Arkansas Arts and Fashion to Interform in 2021. We'll get more into that later on in the session today. But we are here basically to support the creative space. We support a lot of artists, a lot of people in the apparel and fashion businesses as well. And we are sort of an alternative vocational school for fashion design and some artists as well. And so we love working with organizations like Cash and Crystal Bridges and the Momentary as well, because we have a lot of alignment there and just supporting artists in the creative industry that we all know is an industry that could use some support in so many different ways. And so we have major programs outside of Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week, which is sort of our biggest attraction for most people who come across our organization. We also have sewing classes. So if you want to learn how to make your own socks, as I would try to do, because I'm not as ambitious as others, you can sign up for a beginner sewing class and they'll walk you through the fundamentals of using a sewing machine and tracing the lines. More ambitious people sign up for some of those in the intermediate or advanced, and they can make t-shirts, they can make jackets and suits and all these things in between. And so we have free sewing classes based on whatever your expertise and level set is here offered as well. And that's probably our second most popular program. And then after that, we have, of course, our podcast. We also have an Emerge program, which is our designer residency program that is really designed to help fashion and design aficionados take their ideas into an actionable product or business line. And we have a cohort where we actually give them money to be able to learn all that they can through mentorship and hopefully present their garments in the next fashion week after they graduate. So that's sort of an overview in terms of what Interform is. And again, if you find yourself in downtown Springdale, we would love to have you over there. Now, I'll turn it back over to Erica to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to cover today, because I'm not sure if we sent out an agenda, but this is really an open discussion and we want to be conversational whenever we can. Or if you want to save your question to the end, we're open to that as well. But Erica, how about giving them an idea of what to expect in terms of our flow today?
Yeah, thank you so much, Cedric. So our panel, the title of it is Wait, Who Are We? Which I think is a very fundamental and important question. And it's honestly, I have found that a lot of organizations find that question difficult. So I know that we are here for a discussion about how to help internal and external audiences understand how to make sense of shifts in your organization's scope. So I think first off, Cedric and I both want to talk about some of the changes we've seen over the past couple of years and how we've approached them within our teams and within our organizations. And then we'd also like to discuss some solutions that perhaps those of you in the room can help utilize in your own organization. So we'll talk about those, and then we definitely want to make sure to leave time for Q&A at the end. So Cedric, would you like to start, or would you like me to talk about some of the changes that we've seen?
I'll let you go first, Erica, but I would love real quick while we have everyone's attention to just know who's here today, what organization are you representing, maybe in the chat, you can just drop that in there. And that will give Erica and I some more context in terms of who's in the room, and then maybe we can be more targeted in our responses.
That's perfect. Thank you for doing that, Cedric.
You're welcome. Of course, you have Kelsey with Cash, but everyone knows Kelsey, but there we go. Nice. NWA Jazz Society, okay.
Very cool. Yeah, we can look at those. I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just keep monitoring that chat. So changes. Wow. Oh my gosh. What changes haven't we seen over the past few years? I guess, one of the more obvious changes to talk about and to mention is obviously the impact that COVID had on how everybody navigates the world now, but particularly on our operations, just kind of some of those shifts that we saw and how we approached it from a communications perspective. So first off, I will say that back to the significance of the momentary opening date, February 22nd, 2020, that was about 3 weeks before COVID really came to this area and everything kind of shut down. And so it was this weird moment to have a completely new brand fully launched. And we still, I think we're even ourselves trying to figure out what the space was and what it was going to offer. And then all of a sudden we had to shut everything down and completely rethink all of our expectations. But I remember at that time when COVID was happening that, obviously there was, a lot of uncertainty about how quickly we were going to be able to open things back up. And what we really needed to communicate to our visitors, to the people that connect with us. I think especially being an institution where people are coming to visit every day, it was important to obviously focus on that external messaging, but at the same time, it was really important to make sure that our staff knew what was happening first. So the communications director at the time actually walked through the museum and noted all of the places where we would need to have signage, the areas that were going to be too small or that we couldn't include a whole bunch of people in. So for example, like we couldn't have people in the Frank Lloyd Wright House, that was too close together. And then just kind of mapped everything out on a plan sheet that we then distributed to our staff. So it was really important for us to have that internal piece first before we did any sort of external messaging. If anything, it just helps keep everybody on the same page in terms of what needs to be said, how we're thinking about things, and it helps your staff kind of become spokespeople as well. If anybody asks, in certain realms of their capacity of what they do, that they have that sheet that they can speak to. So we kind of walked through, we decided what we were going to do in terms of closing the museum, closing the momentary as well. And we kind of had separate talking points for both of those. And then we assessed our own channels, right? So Crystal Bridges has a blog as well as social media platforms. And then it also has a newsletter. And so we decided that the easiest way to get that communication out would be to write a blog, which we could then use as essentially a landing page that people can go to, that we then amplified through social media and through email. And then everybody could just come to that page and get the information. And if they still had questions, we always include that call to action at the bottom of, call the box office if you need to, call guest services. They, of course, had all of that internal messaging so they could speak to people's questions. And then, we just kind of took it day by day. And honestly, we're still kind of assessing some of those changes that we need to make from COVID because we were closed for about 3 months. We reopened again in June 2020, and we kind of took it slow for a while. We had a mask mandate. We asked that people, maintain 6 feet of distance. And then as we, watched the numbers and what was happening, with the cases in the area, then we made decisions on, how to let up on those. But even so, I think what's been really interesting to see is how event planning is totally different now. Whereas, we could have, 4 to 6 months of runtime for an event. Our programmers are finding that there's still a lot of challenges in getting people booked that far out. And, you just never know what could happen. Somebody could test positive the day before, and then you have to shift to, okay, can we still do this event? Can it be virtual? And there are just a lot of unknowns in that. So I think one of the things that has been really interesting on our team to kind of adapt to that is the more immediacy of decision making, is kind of having an internal source where we can, communicate out a message. So for us, we use Slack a lot. Slack is really our way to kind of communicate with our team, but as well as with different departments very quickly. It's a little bit faster than an email. Obviously, it's instant messaging. And so that's really the place where we say, hey, okay, this thing is changing. What do we need to do? We kind of make that plan within Slack, and then we execute it. But yeah, that was one of the big changes that we've seen and continue to see. And then I also just wanted to speak quickly before I turn it over to Cedric about communicating the change in scope that happened when we brought the momentary on board. Because I think this is a really interesting juxtaposition to what Cedric is going to be talking about, whereas Interform kind of brought together multiple organizations. We did the exact opposite. We doubled our organization. And so it was a bit of a different communication of organization scope, because the momentary, even though it is the same, under the same umbrella as Crystal Bridges, they are two separate brands. They are two separate entities, have different target audiences, all of the things. And so when we were bringing the momentary on board, that whole first year before the momentary even opened, there were a lot of discussions about, again, what is this? Who are we? And so I really sat down with some of our different communications folks and put together a messaging framework to kind of understand, okay, we know that Crystal Bridges is an art museum, but what is the momentary, and what is it going to offer, and how do we talk about it? And so that's one of the solutions that I'm planning on talking everybody through a little bit later in this session, is to kind of how to think about that messaging framework. But essentially what you want to do is start with your mission and vision and your values. So if your organization's already got that, that's always the foundational document to resort back to. It's always really helpful too if you have some sort of formal style guide. I have always found it helpful. This can be something that maybe talks about what your voice is, or, how your brand should be portrayed. So, at Crystal Bridges, we say, like, we always want to make sure that the tone is welcoming and open and inviting. We don't want people to feel like we're a stuffy collegiate art museum where if you don't have an art degree, you just don't get it. We don't want to create that kind of culture at all. Art is for everybody, and we want to create that access point for everybody. So again, like I said, we'll talk about a messaging framework later on, but that was one of the things that we really had to do to assess, okay, Crystal Bridges is over here, momentary is over here. We need to be able to communicate both of these effectively, but they're not the same. So that was one of the big changes. So anyway, with all of that, I would love to turn it over to Cedric to hear what changes he's seen on his end.
Yeah, we're not going to spend the entirety talking about COVID, because I'm sure we've all heard a lot about that. So I'll speak in other areas, but I will say COVID did have some positives in terms of it slowed down the world and our lives personally and professionally, and helped everyone to really reassess what's important, from our health to our relationships with people who may have been at risk. And in an organizational level, it brought us, at least here at Interform, back to sort of that mission, vision, values conversation that Erica touched on just a moment ago. We were making dresses and shirts and pants and accessories, and all of a sudden, when there was a mask shortage, we actually had our students learn to make masks for our local organizations to help supply the first responders with these masks until the supply made it to the levels that we needed here. And after that, we sort of had a moment where we decided to ultimately rebrand the organization from 2 organizations into one, because we realized that we are more than just arts and fashion. And having the name Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week and the other name of our organization, Arkansas Arts and Fashion, was somewhat limiting to a lot of people who may come across that brand name for the first time. And we knew that we were more than just arts and fashion. And so in 2021, in January, we actually rebranded from 2 organizations, one for-profit, one nonprofit, into a single nonprofit. And some of the reasons were, 1, it was really clunky to remember the 2 long names, and then 2, to understand and communicate how this name was different from this name in terms of Fashion Week versus Arkansas Arts and Fashion. And so it just made it simpler from a marketing and comm standpoint to have a single entity. But then we specifically chose to stay in a nonprofit route because we wanted to be supportive and be able to subsidize some of the offerings that we do for the communities that we want to serve. And a lot of the communities that we target here, including downtown Springdale, are the marginalized and minority populations. We love to support women and try to build socioeconomic equality across all of those spaces. And so a nonprofit status allowed us to maintain the ability to fundraise and to get grants and to get tax deductions for people who want to invest and support our programs. And so we landed on a word that doesn't exist, Interform. You won't find that in a dictionary, but it really was sort of this blank slate that we can make into our own. It didn't already have a preconceived meaning or notion, and it was sort of this intersection of different things. And we just have been building on that since January of 2021. But we all know that a rebrand is hard, let alone marketing an existing brand. And so it came with a lot of challenges, from just being able to let people know that we still do Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week. We decided, or we discussed changing the name to be Interform Fashion Week, but we landed ultimately to keep it the same. And so we had all these internal conversations about what to change, what to keep, what it should look like, the graphics and all these different things. And so, as we all like to think, a democratic vote where we get everyone to agree that this is the best way to move forward would have been great, but that never happens. We have a staff of 17 people, so we'll never ever get to a unified, everyone agrees. And so one of the hardest parts about change is that you have to have someone ultimately take ownership and just move forward with the idea and then get the buy-in later at the level from a global standpoint on the team. And so our boss is Robin Wallace Atkinson. Maybe some of you recognize her. She has been a savvy leader. She's been growing an organization for the last 5 or so years, and we really trust her decision. And when sometimes we can't make a decision, we just lean to her and we just figure out how to support her after the fact. And so we move forward with the new name, we move forward with the new branding, and we started introducing additional programs to our organization to be able to support some of those changes. So that was probably the first challenge for us, is coming out of COVID. It's just hitting that reset button and rebranding and adding more vision, values, and purpose to our programming so that it was top of mind to our internal team and our external team. We also had a lot of changes from a staff standpoint. If you were to check out our roster, our staff roster a year and a half ago, 13 out of the 17 people would not have been on the team. And so there's a lot of new faces. And with that, you always have difference in styles and the culture changes. And we're all still trying to find out, what the best fit and complement is from one person to the next, because having less than a year of experience is really hard to understand the breadth of an organization that has multiple programs. So that was probably the second thing that we had to try to overcome in terms of challenges and changes. And then the third thing, which I think will be familiar to everyone here who has been affiliated with America in the last 2 years, is that we have become very polarized from a political standpoint. And a lot of people cliche say we're a nation divided. And previously, maybe it's baby boomer age, I'm not sure of the Gen X or whatever the timelines are, we had a really hard separation from our religion and our politics in the office. But as we all have experienced in the last couple of years, it has been inescapable. People are going to come to work with their problems, especially when they're social problems. That's what politics usually entail. And so now we can't just tell people to swallow their tongue or swallow their emotions and come to work, because people want to talk about that. And we see people leaving jobs to go to ones that care about them and really value them. And so we had to also address that internally, but externally as well, where we had to make a decision. If we say something about issue X, Y, Z, how will that affect our stakeholders and our ability to fundraise and to get buy-in and our board members and our team? And so weirdly enough, Interform is one of those organizations. We're very much a big mouse, as I would call it, as in we speak out, and we speak out very vehemently about social issues when we think that it's affecting a minority group that we want to support. So some of the examples from the last couple of years has been women's rights, the transgender legislation, we've had Black Lives Matter, and a number of things on top of COVID. And so having to decide internally, like, what do we want to do? What do we want to say? And again, trying to get buy-in from as many people, but not necessarily everyone on the team, has been a huge challenge for us, just like a lot of your organizations. But then also putting out the support that we have externally to the public to say, here's what we're doing to address women's rights. Here's what we're doing to support our Black residents here in the community. And a lot of that included gathering resources, making ourselves available, trying to find funding opportunities to support these organizations and these groups that are affected most by that. But mostly, and Robin, if she was here, she would say, being outspoken rather than silent, because we know that silence comes across as a safer tactic from a business. We feel that us being as outspoken as we have been has actually led to some of the increased success and funding that we've had. And in fact, we had a grant just recently for $2.2 million. And Robin would definitely give credit to the fact that we're more in the realm of advocating for these rights as a reason why we were shown that favor and able to get that sort of support to continue doing what we're doing. And so that was a challenge, but it also had a blessing at the end. And so we're happy that we went through those tense times and the friction from internally and externally. And it's made us better in the long run, and we feel like we're moving in the right direction. We're just going to continue that momentum. And then I'll kind of tie into some of the things that we would recommend as solutions when it comes to change. And I'll let Erica add to that since I'm already hogging the mic here. But when it comes to change, one of my favorite books is a very simple read. If you don't like to read like I am, maybe you can listen to it on Audible. That's how I get most of my reading done. But there's a simple book called Who Moved My Cheese? And I don't remember the author, but I'll find it for you if I need to. It is basically about two little people, which is basically humans who are the size of a mouse, and then two mice who are looking for cheese in this maze. And all of a sudden, one day the cheese disappears, and it's sort of a saga of their reactions. And the essence is that change always happens, and how we respond to the change is really the most telling part of who we are as an organization or who we are as an individual. There we go, right there in the chat, we got the assist. So if you haven't read that book, that'll be my first solution. Read that. If you're a manager, if you're a future manager, or you're a leader today, it may be something so simple that can help you just get your team to have a mindset shift that change is inevitable. And we just have to embrace it and just know that it's a part of life, it's a part of business. And so beyond that, I think that my personality, my background, being in the military, veterans tend to be very to the point. We don't tend to challenge authority. We tend to just follow the direction that was given to us and only ask questions if we feel like it's really an emergency or situation. What I've learned, and I feel like the younger generation has been the same way, is that people tend to ask more questions nowadays in the civilian space. And they like to know why, like to know the reasons why we're going through the change, why we're doing things differently than the way we've been doing them before. And so you almost have to stop and pause and recognize that before you can just give blind orders and expect a grown human to follow through on those. So the first suggestion I would provide for anyone dealing with change, whether it be internal or external, is to just work on really communicating the need for the change in a way that resonates with your team, with the people who are most impacted by that, and just learning to be empathetic and have those conversations and creating space to be able to listen to people's fears, people's concerns, but also try to bring it to a positive where you highlight the benefits, the potential upside to the change. So for us, it was the rebrand. A rebrand was going to be clunky. It was going to cost us money, but it also had all the benefits of making it easier for people to find us, for people to partner with us, and brings in these opportunities that we probably wouldn't be able to find if we didn't go through with that. We had a lot of turnover on the team, and no one likes to see turnover on the team, but our turnover was really specific to where we were trying to go in the next 10 years versus where we were in the previous 5 or so years. And so you have to just be able to bring the positive into that conversation, but create that space for people to talk about it, because they will talk about it. Whether they talk about it with you in the office, they're going to talk about it at home with friends. It's like the meeting after the meeting conversation. So just have that meeting and just let the words flow out so you can be there and actually address those pain points and make people feel comforted. And so once you feel like you're getting buy-in, again, it's really hard to get global buy-in, especially with a team as big as Crystal Bridges would be. I can only imagine getting everyone to agree that this is the best thing to do going forward would be impossible. But you really want to try to bring as much people in to support that and really just lean in on the rest of them to come along as they see the results, as they see the other people just taking this new change into consideration and really giving it a chance. But then you also want to try to give people the resources that they need to be successful, just like you would do with or without change. And that could be training, that could be one-on-one mentoring, that could be buying software or spending money to make it just easier for them. Or for us, if it's trying to build a new culture and build this team cohesiveness, maybe it's social events, maybe it's making time in the office where people can just walk around and chit chat without forcing them to get back to their computers to get back to work. And so there's just different ways that you can support people who are going through a change, knowing that change is never easy. It's always going to be a thing that we have to deal with, but just really try to make it as much of a safe environment as possible when it comes to change. And those are probably my top 3 points. Again, check out that book if you love to read. If you don't love to read, it's a short read. And I think it really will be sort of a cool way to look at it from an attitude shift standpoint as well. But I'd love to hear what Erica has in mind as well as far as solutions to change.
That's so fantastic. I'm so happy I get to do this with Cedric. That was wonderful. And a book recommendation.
Yeah.
Doesn't get much better. But I did actually want to speak something. You touched on it, that I think it is really important to bring your internal staff along with you, particularly internal, but when you're talking about, especially, these larger social issues and things that, to Cedric's point, you're not going to get everybody on board with, you are going to have maybe, in some situations I found, like, some particular staff members might feel, extremely passionate about wanting to say something about a certain observance or about a certain issue. And I think in those cases, what we've tried to do from a communications perspective is clearly say, like, okay, here's kind of the wall we're bumping into, but then bring that person along to help find that solution. So, even if it's somebody, from a team that has nothing to do with communications, they just say, hey, like, why didn't we say this on social media? And it's like, okay, well, this is kind of what we're running into from communications perspective. Do you have any ideas or any solutions or anything like that? Because I think one of the other things that we've seen, particularly from that side of change, is that it's not just messaging needs to be authentic, right? Like, it's not enough to just say, I don't know, happy National AAPI Heritage Month. I think there really needs to be intention behind what you're messaging. And I know this was true of Interform's messaging, but it's got to be something that is a little bit more authentic than just, saying something for the sake of saying it because you want to make sure to have
check
the buy-in of
your
exactly, to check a box, to make sure that you don't lose donors, all of that stuff. And so, you really want to make sure to assess properly, do you have the time to develop an authentic response? And if not, how do your priorities need to shift so that you can, if it really is important to you and to your brand that you respond, shifting the rest of your priorities to make that the core priority, in terms of other than just saying, like, oh, I see tomorrow that it's such and such, like, what are we going to do? You're never going to create or produce an authentic message that way. So it takes time and intention and shifting priorities to make that the core priority. I appreciate all of that. But so now I think what Cedric and I would like to do is just take a little bit of time to talk through some solutions that perhaps you can utilize for your organizations to help, again, going back to our the theme of this discussion of how you can help your internal and external audiences understand how to make sense of shifts in your organization's scope. And the solution that I would really love to talk about is how to develop a messaging framework for your organization. This to me, again, my realm is largely within messaging and copywriting and editing. So this is my bread and butter every single day. I think it is really important for every organization to have some sort of document like a messaging framework that it's meant to be an internal document, but it can be utilized to help produce messaging or copy for external purposes. If it's possible, Brittany or Cash folks, I would be happy to share a messaging framework template with everybody on this call if they would be interested in having something like that. But it's really about creating a document that evolves with you over time. It's not meant to be something that you write and then set in stone and then it stays that way forever. It's something that evolves with you, but it's also a really great tool for onboarding as well. It's a one-pager that you can share with all of your new hires to say, this is what we're all about. And so essentially at its core, the elements of a messaging framework include a brand promise. So, this is the thing that you're promising to offer every single one of your constituents, your customers, the people that interact with you. A positioning statement. So how are you differentiating yourself from everybody else? What makes you unique? Who are your target audiences? You want to have a primary message or an elevator pitch. So if you had 60 seconds to get across the main messages of your brand, what would you say? But that message can also be broken out into different pillars depending on what you offer. So I'll use Crystal Bridges as an example. Crystal Bridges welcomes all to experience the power of art within the beauty of nature. And we do that for art, architecture, and nature. And so one of our framework documents has kind of that breakout of what can you do for art, architecture, or nature. But, those messages can be completely different depending on your organization. And then underneath each pillar, you want to have proof points. So these aren't, frilly statements. These are your facts and your figures that support your messages. So everything kind of builds back up to the top. And what I've seen for a lot of organizations is that they actually state their mission and vision statement at the top of their messaging framework and include everything underneath that, which I think is very important because that's really what you're building back up to is how are we living this mission? So like for Crystal Bridges, we welcome all to experience the power of art within the beauty of nature. How are we doing that? Right. And so those messages are really helping to build up that case for how are you living your mission? How is the work that you're actually doing day to day accomplishing that? And so how I like to start these out is just to have a conversation with a small group of people. So if you're thinking about your position and wanting to do a messaging framework, you might be thinking, well, who do I bring in? At what time? What do I do? And, honestly, even if you're an individual just doing this by yourself, or you're part of a really small team, or you're part of a big team, you can do this with a handful of people. So you think about, if you are somebody who's in a communications capacity, bringing somebody else in communications would be helpful. And then maybe a development person, maybe, if you have access to your board members, maybe a board member would be helpful. But I like to have just initial kickoff conversation to just have people talk and just present that, could be an existential question of who are we, right? If you had to describe your organization to somebody in 60 seconds, how would you say it? What are the words that you would use? What kind of feelings and thoughts do you want to make sure that stick with people about who you are or what you offer? And just kind of write down a bunch of notes from that, take them back, and then kind of sit with them, see if any themes occur. If you see any patterns in terms of language or sentences that were used or feelings or emotions, and then just kind of write those down and organize them as best you can. And then, the other thing that I like to think about too in that initial conversation is who are we speaking to as well. So that could be, another conversation where, you assess, okay, these are the people that I know that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. If you don't necessarily know who those people are, like, for example, we're still trying to figure out, what our social media audiences look like, what our digital audiences look like. But you can kind of assess from day to day, just knowing like, okay, so we have, for the example, Crystal Bridges, we have our general museum goers, we have our members, we have people that, come here from touch states. We have people we know that come here in the summer. And these are some of the patterns and behaviors that we've noticed about those folks, either from, comments that they've left on social media or the way that they engage with us, or, just things that we've noticed. Oh, well, members really enjoy booking tickets for these types of events or things like that. You can just pick up little notes like that along the way from how your different audiences behave. But I think you can also, if you wanted to, just send out a questionnaire, if you felt comfortable with doing that, to people who are who interact with you quite often, and maybe just ask those questions of them as well. If you had to describe us, how would you describe us? Or if you had to pick, 3 adjectives to describe us, which adjectives would you pick, or something like that? And just kind of, pick up those little hints of information any way that you can and put those together. And I guess just to consider, like, who do you interact with? Who do you want to interact with, and why? And see if you can group those. Are there certain messages you want to convey to certain audience groups? Are there certain facts and figures you want to make sure they know? And this is how you kind of organize them. And I think it might make sense once you see how the template looks, but it's really all about having those initial conversations to kind of get that information first off. And then you see, like, okay, once you get it all down on paper, it's kind of interesting the way this works is that it's just, it kind of starts grouping itself. And then what you can do once you get that initial information is take it back to that core strategy team that you met with at the beginning, and basically just say, okay, based off of, this little bit of research that I've done, the conversations that we've had, these are the kinds of words and messages that I'm seeing coming through. What do you think about this? And then it's kind of a working document where you get that buy-in along the way with that core strategy team. And then once you get it into a good place where you feel like you have the sentence structure, you feel like you know your pillars, then that's when you can present it to your director, your board, whomever else needs to see it, get that initial feedback, and then that becomes your document. And so, once you have that messaging document, then what you can do is pull those messages for various marketing and communications copy. You can pull it for developing newsletters, developing, content on your website. That document, like I said, should stay internal. It's not really meant to be an external document, but you can utilize it to create those external messages. And like I said, I mean, like, once your scope changes, go back to that messaging document and reassess it. Do these messages still make sense for us? Are they still a big part of our brand? Is there something else that's taken a bigger precedent? And do we need to change that? Do we need to add a messaging pillar? And so I think it's just helpful when there are a lot of changes happening up here to have one source that you can look at and say, no, this is what we have established as a core strategy team that we want to focus on. And if this is changing, then we need to come back together and reassess that. So it's a lot of creative thinking. It's a lot of, just kind of thinking through language and how that language can potentially be perceived. You also want to think about tone as well as when you're going through this, just to make sure that, you're communicating in the right way. But again, I've found it incredibly helpful. And actually within Crystal Bridges, I set up those documents for the brand itself, but then I'm also kind of helping individual departments also figure out who they are and how they operate so they can have their own documents as well. And I think it's been pretty successful. If anything, just to have it to say that, you know, this is how we think about ourselves in one page. So that's just a little bit about one solution that's been really helpful for us in communicating those things, again, starting internally and then working externally. But now I want to turn it over to Cedric to hear about some of the solutions that he's been able to utilize.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. And I think the short takeaway is to try to get Erica or time on the calendar with Erica to help you with your comm strategy and all that stuff there. Maybe you'll see her Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. at the social event. But yeah, it sounds like we need some of that help as well, Erica. So I was taking notes over here and also trying to catch up on the chat. So I appreciate everyone who put suggestions and resources in the chat. So continue to do that. If you think of some bright idea that we can share with everyone here right now, then we can capture that in the chat as well. And so building on just solutions around change and how to just navigate that, whether you're the leader of the organization, whether you're about to be the leader in some future date, I think one of the most important things that we have learned to do, and this is very much like the military versus my last point, which is more an opposite, is to take a team approach to it. And so connect with other nonprofits, connect with other leaders and individuals, and have conversations about the thing that you're facing and trying to resolve. And so we have been fortunate, at least in the last year or so, to be a part of cohorts, to be a part of working groups, to be a part of just convenings that are all around social issues, around things maybe diversity, equity, and inclusion related. And so we have joined these groups. Sometimes there's a handful of organizations, and sometimes there's 20s or so. But I think just having other people around to bounce ideas off of on a regular basis, whether it's weekly or monthly, has been something that's really valuable for us. Because maybe we're going to say something that's a little bit pointed or insensitive in some area, and we don't realize that until we share what our intentions and what our plans are with other people who give us feedback and ask us to consider things, you know, from a different perspective. And so that's been really good, because we know that if you are really passionate about something, it can overcloud your more rational judgment, and your emotions can be tied into your words. And you want to come across in a way that is receptive to all audiences and not just an attack or perceived as that way. So we're a part of a weekly group that meets, and I believe they were created by the Walton Family Foundation, and it's called the Community Vision Working Group. I'm pretty sure if you're interested in joining that, you could be a part of that conversation. But it's just organizations such as Bike Bentonville. Most of them are Bentonville based, I will say that. And we just talk through things that we're experiencing and challenges we're dealing with socially as organizations. And then we sort of work together to put out statements, to try to put together action items to help overcome some of those issues. And so that's one of them. We also have an event coming up next week. I didn't get the exact details. It's either Monday, maybe midweek or sometime, but it's going to be a noon to 1 virtual opportunity for nonprofits, just like the ones here in attendance today, to just have a conversation about how to address some of these issues that we're all facing and talking about internally. And if you're a smaller organization, you probably have more flexibility, but maybe you're more sensitive to funding. And so you don't want to say anything that's going to jeopardize your opportunity to get that funding. If you're a bigger organization, maybe you have funding and you feel secure there, but you're more at risk because you have these stakeholders who are going to be paying a lot more attention to you, and your brand and your name is at stake. And so if you say the wrong thing with one word, and you feel the pressure and the sensitivity around that. So we're just looking at creating these spaces to have these conversations so we can ultimately come up with solutions and not just use that as an excuse to not do anything. And so we have this conversation happening, this convening with Cash next week. If you're interested in that, we would love for you to drop your chat in the email or reach out to one of the Cash members, and then we'll try to get you the exact time and the Zoom information for that. But the long story short is not to do everything that you're trying to do alone, and try to find that opportunity to partner with other people, to have conversations with other people, even if there's no agenda and you just have it on the calendar, because that's really going to give you added perspective and feedback. And we always can do more together than we can alone. So if I could leave you with that, that would be my biggest piece of evidence or advice. And beyond that, we've also had the fortune here of bringing in consultants who are experts in areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're using Monica Kumar, some of you may know her name, to help us out with that culture building, with being more inclusive internally with our practices and just being more equitable with the people that we serve. And that just builds into that rebrand and that retargeting of our vision, our values, and our mission. We also have a communications specialist who the Walton Family Foundation has provided to our organization to help us put out these statements that are really tough to figure out the language and to really say in a way that isn't offensive, that isn't making us come across as lobbyists, because they're still a nonprofit. And so we have to be careful and balanced in the way that we communicate. And so those are two things I would leave you with in terms of dealing with those change opportunities and dealing with the possible solutions that you can use when you're trying to figure out how to get from where you are now to where you want to be. And I think that's almost an hour of conversation, Erica. This has been great. And we do want to open the room up to some conversation from you all here in attendance, either through Q&A. If you've already submitted a question somehow, we hopefully capture that. If you haven't, you can drop a question in the chat. You can come off of mute. But I think that's a good stopping point. What do you think, Erica, to go into the Q&As?
That sounds great.
Okay, let's hear your questions or comments and general thoughts before you get to the questions if you feel obliged. We always say not all at once whenever the room is quiet.
Give everybody a moment to sip their coffee.
Yeah. Well, there's some good stuff in the chat already that I saw in terms of advice and resources. So I'm going to have to take screenshots of that. But if we missed the question, looks like Paul was asking, what is that group? Okay, Brittany already answered it. Yeah, so if we missed a question, feel free to retype it. So it'll be at the top of the inbox, so to speak, or just come off of mute. We're a small enough group, I think we can handle a direct conversation.
I wanted to give you all the chance to go first, but I have a burning question for Erica. So Erica, you were talking earlier about how it's important to be authentic when you make statements, and that when there are people on your team who feel strongly about something, it's important to have that framework to go back to. Who are we as an organization? Does this fit? And making sure that you really work with that person or people to think through that. However, when there is an event, something that happens, it's obviously important to be timely and to respond. So how have, in your experience, how do you balance that importance of timely response with balancing the potential risk of taking your time to be authentic and missing that timeliness? How do you balance that?
That's a really great question, and something that I think that we've done really well in the past, but also have made some mistakes in other moments. I think with, an organization like Crystal Bridges that has a lot of stakeholders, it really starts with us kind of getting that assessment from our board and our leadership in terms of what do we need to respond and how do we need to respond? And then, it's kind of one of those things, is like, once you get that mandate, it's my job to start writing. But I think if you are part of a smaller organization, or you're perhaps the one that's making those decisions, I think it's honestly kind of a gut feeling. If you feel like you can, and I think this is also where a messaging framework comes in handy. If you can look at something and assess the situation and say, you know what, we can actually speak to this authentically with these particular messages because this is already part of who we are, then that's a quick way to respond to something that happens rapidly. But if it's something that comes on quickly and you've never really spoken about it before, or it doesn't really fit in with your messaging at the time, I think that's a moment to kind of step back and say, okay, maybe we don't respond to this one right now, but maybe this initiates some sort of conversation that we start having internally about, I think maybe we do want to align ourselves with this, or maybe we do want to steer away from this and make that known to our external audiences. So I would say, again, like that's another helpful tool for the messaging framework is if it already fits within your messages and you feel like you can respond to it authentically in the moment, go ahead and do it. If you feel like you can't at that moment, then hold off and start that conversation internally.
And that, I assume, keeps you out of that situation where a board member, for example, is suddenly surprised, like, wait, why did you all make this statement? Because if you have that statement grounded in a messaging framework that your board has already seen, like this is based on things that we've agreed encapsulate our organization's values, then it's easier to make those decisions without bottlenecking. Is that right?
I think that's a great assessment. And also, if you do have that kind of access to your board, and you do feel strongly that you want to respond, I mean, I don't think it doesn't hurt to just reach out to them and say, hey, we would like to respond to this, and these are all the reasons why, and then just kind of see if you can get that sign off in a timely manner. But if you can't, or if you feel like somebody is going to be caught off guard, then maybe that is the sign to kind of hold back. And it doesn't have to be forever, like I think that, we can use an example if we want, but like, for example, the anti-transgender legislation in our state, if that feels like something, just an example, like if you haven't talked about that before, it could be a thing where you say like, hey, like we would like to respond to this in some authentic way. We're just not sure how at the moment. It can be, 3 to 4 months later, if you're able to develop something that is meaningful. Like it's still going to be an issue 3 to 4 months from now. So I think that is the difference.
Yeah, and building on that, Kelsey, because we have a board of directors as well. And like any board, they're a great counterbalance to make sure a nonprofit in theory doesn't go rogue and do things that would hurt the organization long term. They don't know the ins and outs of the organization. They couldn't run the organization for most boards, especially if they're not a working board. And so we have created a document and we call it our social guardrails, because my boss, Robin, she's a type A personality where something happens, she's doing something the moment after in response to it. I am more of a, I guess, pragmatic would be the word. Like it takes me forever to move forward because I want to make sure that everything is right and that I've checked every box and I've practiced and rehearsed all the scenarios before I move forward. And so we sort of balance each other out in a way. And it's kind of the same with the entire team. She's ready to say something an hour after big news comes out or the next day at a minimum. That's long for her to wait a whole day about some social conversation. But we also recognize that we don't want to be too fast. We want to give it time for us to have an even state of mind, to maybe submit it to other people for their input in one of these convening sessions or with our board of directors, just to make sure that we're not as closed-minded as we would be otherwise if we rush to say something. Because we always feel like we have to say something if we feel like people's social freedoms have been in question. And so we know that we're going to say something. It's just that timing is a hard part of that. Because for some of us, saying something after a day or two is an eternity. For the rest of us, that's just like rushing into it. And so we do have this social guardrail sort of template, sort of what Erica was touching on, where we can just tell the board, here's sort of our mission, vision, and values. We won't get outside of this scope if it doesn't fall into these categories, but we don't want to have to approve every single thing we say through the board. And so they basically just signed this document acknowledging that we're gonna keep it contained in a very digestible and professional manner, no matter what we decide to speak out about.
Before you respond, I'm gonna interrupt just briefly to make sure everyone knows that we've got about 10 minutes left in our conversation. So if you have any burning questions, please be sure to ask them in the next couple of minutes.
Brittany, I don't have any questions. I just have a comment. I appreciate so much what Erica and Cedric have said and shared. I'm looking forward to the marketing messaging framework. As I think about my board, which we've built in the last year to a number of people, it would be really helpful to revisit the mission, make sure that the branches of the tree are all reaching up toward that end goal, and just revisiting it on a regular basis. I think it would be just so helpful. And when you brought up the idea of focus groups, or having a group of people just kind of take a look at it, is that what you understand our organization to be? That can be really, really helpful. So I appreciate kind of that nudge to get things going in that direction. And I'll also just say that I'm thankful in some ways that I'm involved in a jazz society, which doesn't have the political and social distractions or even the challenges that Cedric laid out earlier. I feel like, jazz is used to escape what's happening in the world, so I guess I just say I feel fortunate to be working in a medium where people can kind of let reality go for a while and move on from there. So thank you for your comments today.
Thank you, Graham. I feel like you have to be in a good mood when you work around music as a day-to-day part of your work life. I mean, how calming can that be? I'm jealous.
Exactly.
And I think that's a wonderful example too, Graham, of just, something I love that you think about Northwest Arkansas Jazz Society in that way. And I'm hoping that can, make it into some messaging, because I think there's a really compelling story there to help people to interact with your organization and what you do.
Instead of Calgon take me away, it's jazz take me away, right? Help me get through this. Thank you.
I love that. I thought that Paul has offered some pretty good stuff in the chat as well. So Paul, feel free to expand on anything you may have typed in there if you're a vocal extrovert or feel inclined to do so. We would love to hear from you, or anyone else as well. In our last 8 minutes, as Brittany reminded us.
Well, I'm kind of an introvert.
Same here. We're the best.
As you know, so I agree with what really resonated with me is when you were talking about taking the time to get the message right and getting board members in. I think there's a lot of times where you'll have leadership who wants to say something right away, and I think that's a fairly common thing for nonprofits. And they need to just say, okay, well, this is not you talking. You have your opinion, but now you've got to talk for this organization. That's a group of people who may not have the same or to the extent of your passion about this subject. So I think that's a challenging thing for a lot of leadership and especially communications professionals, to get them to, pump the brakes and hold off and say, okay, we will say something about this, but we're going to make sure that it sounds like and in the voice of the organization and not your organization. Now, if you're, really small and you're in control, or you're a sole proprietor or whatever, you can say what you want. But when you're thinking about, you've got to take into consideration, as you said, funders, you've got to take into consideration potential guests, you've got to take into consideration a bottom line if you're, trying to have some profitability or to not just live off of grant funding. So I think that's the real value of communications people, is they need to be in on those conversations like straight up before leadership hits the keyboard, because that can turn into a PR mess instead of a proactive message.
Oh yeah,
so
agreed.
Yeah, I appreciate everything you've been saying. It's been great.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, we had that conversation for sure. Our boss is sort of more outspoken than maybe the rest of the team, but she's really good at saying this is me saying this versus this is the organization saying this. But even then, it's still complicated, because common sense, we know that if she says it and people know her as the owner of the organization, then it still comes across somewhat as we're saying it. And so that's been another tricky thing that we haven't figured out yet either, but we've been working on that.
I think that's the crux of the challenge. You just said it right there, is, people, especially here in Northwest Arkansas, people become so associated with the organizations they lead that it's hard to separate the two. And then you have to go back and backtrack and try and say, whoa, that was, that's not.
Yeah, it's a complicated world.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
I like that word.
Oh, Paul, you hit the nail on the head so hard. And what's interesting is that I feel like that is another point to bringing your internal folks along, right? The folks who are not communications people, because I think that's what I've seen in a lot of cases. It's a lot of people who have an individual passion about something, which like you may agree with 100%, but we have to take ourselves out of our individual feelings for a second and assess that, you know, just because you have, you know, your own personal social media account doesn't mean that that's the same thing that we can put on the Crystal Bridges social media account, right? And so how do you separate those, or how do you find that consistency? And yeah, it's just really important to keep that in mind. And one of the other things that I wanted to touch on quickly too is just, you know, getting back to that point about, you know, not everybody is going to agree with you and all of that stuff, and assessing, you know, what you want to align yourselves with. I mean, Crystal Bridges in the past few years, we've produced statements supporting Black Lives Matter, supporting LGBTQ community, and we've gotten, you know, nasty messages for that. But I think it's just, you have to stay true to your mission and what you're here to do. And sometimes you just kind of have to, you know, say, okay, I can assess that this is different from, you know, an actual PR crisis, and, you know, people are going to be mad, but we just have to stay true to who we are in the end.
I think that's a perfect note to end on, actually. Thank you both, Erica and Cedric. And thank you all for your time today. Thank you for joining us. I hope that this was really helpful. We will send out via email the messaging framework. I also want to drop in the chat the In Conversation that Cedric mentioned. It is Wednesday, the 27th, and that will be kind of a follow-up conversation about what you can say and how you can begin to think about what you can say. Before we go, I do have a couple more housekeeping items. We want to make sure that everyone is aware that CASH offers a few different resources and tools for your organizations. We have an arts and culture calendar, so specific to the region. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're in Siloam Springs or Bentonville or Bella Vista. We offer a regional arts calendar. So if you have something coming up, please feel free to put it on that calendar, and we can help share and amplify with our audiences, with the rest of the community, what you've got going on. We would love to make that a resource for you guys, as well as a directory. If you are an artist, if you have an artist in your circle, whether that be a photographer, graphic designer, whatever it might be, our directory will link anyone searching for all manner of creative needs with local community artists who are open for work. You can add your information or an artist information, or ask an artist to add their information, don't do it for them, to our directory, and that is available. Both of those things are available on our website. We'd love it if you would sign up for our newsletter to stay in touch. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to myself, Kelsey, or Lisa Marie with anything you might need. We'd also love if you could join us for future sessions. These will be virtual, free, all week long. Feel free to take a look at our website. And if there's something else that interests you, we'd love to see you again. So thank you guys.